That line captures everything about how Fox News operates today, especially when it comes to religion. Over the years, Fox News has built a massive empire, not by informing people but by shaping emotions. Fear, anger, and outrage aren't just side effects of their coverage, they're the product itself. And nowhere is this more obvious than in how they talk about Christianity. Recently, a wave of anger spread across conservative media when Fox News reported that a public school textbook supposedly labeled Christianity a white supremacist religion. The headline alone was enough to spark fury. It played perfectly into a familiar narrative that the left and the elites are trying to destroy Christian America. But as usual, once you look closer, the story starts to fall apart. The textbook in question didn't call Christianity a white supremacist group. It discussed how white supremacist movements in America have used Christian symbols, language, and even scripture to justify their actions. It wasn't an attack on Christianity. It was a factual statement about how religion has been weaponized by extremists throughout history. Fox News didn't tell that part. Instead, they cut, twisted, and framed the context to create emotional shock. Because the point wasn't truth, it was outrage. When people hear they're calling Christianity racist, it hits deep. It feels like an attack on identity, not just belief. That reaction is intentional. It keeps viewers angry, defensive, and loyal, and it makes them easier to manipulate. This is how propaganda works in the modern age. Not by inventing lies out of thin air, but by distorting truth just enough to trigger a feeling. And Fox News has mastered that craft. They know their audience isn't tuning in to be challenged. They're tuning in to be reassured, to hear that they're the good ones, the persecuted ones, the misunderstood patriots under siege by a godless world. So when Fox News paints stories like this, it's not about religion at all. It's about power. Because in America, Christianity isn't just a faith. It's a political tool. It's wrapped into ideas of nationalism, identity, and moral superiority. So defending Christianity on air is really about defending a political tribe. That's why a story about a textbook becomes a national moral crisis. It's why Merry Christmas wars dominate December headlines. And it's why Fox News keeps warning viewers that their faith is under attack. Fear keeps people from asking questions. It makes them cling harder to the stories that comfort them. And when people believe they're being persecuted, they'll follow almost anyone who claims to defend them. That's the psychology Fox relies on, the same mechanism that religious leaders have used for centuries. If you convince people they're under siege, you don't need facts, you just need an enemy. And lately, Fox News has turned secular America into that enemy. Professors, scientists, educators, even high school textbooks, all painted as part of a conspiracy to erase faith. But the truth is simpler and less dramatic. People are just becoming more aware of how religion has shaped power structures, justified violence, and suppressed progress. That's not persecution. That's education. When scholars and historians talk about religion's connection to racism, sexism, or colonialism, they're not attacking believers. They're describing facts. Uncomfortable ones, maybe, but still facts. Yet in the Fox News universe, discomfort is treated as blasphemy. If a lesson challenges the myth of Christian innocence, it must be anti-Christian. If a teacher mentions that slaveholders used the Bible to justify slavery, that's indoctrination. If a sociologist studies how churches were complicit in segregation, that's hate. This is how critical thinking gets twisted into cultural warfare. And it works because the people most invested in their beliefs are often the easiest to offend. Outrage feels righteous. It feels like purpose. And Fox News sells that feeling daily. It's worth asking, why would a network with billions of dollars and endless airtime spend so much energy convincing Christians that they're victims? Because victims are loyal. Victims tune in every night. Victims donate, vote, and rally for protection. And most importantly, victims don't notice who's exploiting them. When Fox tells Christians that textbooks or teachers are mocking their faith, it's not about defending Christianity. It's about defending Fox's business model. They're feeding people fear disguised as faith. They've built an echo chamber where outrage becomes identity, where every fact that challenges belief is labeled as hate, and where truth itself is irrelevant as long as the story makes you feel persecuted enough to stay tuned. Let's take that textbook example again. The idea that Christianity has been used as a justification for white supremacy isn't new. Historians have documented it for decades, from the Ku Klux Klan's Christian Crusades to segregationist pastors quoting scripture in defense of Jim Crow. None of this means Christianity is white supremacy. It means extremists have repeatedly cloaked hate in the language of holiness. But try explaining that nuance on Fox News. It doesn't fit the narrative. Nuance doesn't get clicks or ratings or donations. Outrage does, so the story gets flattened into good versus evil, believer versus unbeliever, us versus them. And once that framing sticks, truth no longer matters. This isn't just about Fox either. It's a reflection of a deeper cultural problem, the merging of religion and politics into a single, emotion-driven identity. When faith becomes a brand, truth becomes optional. And when truth becomes optional, manipulation becomes easy. That's why these networks work so hard to make every issue sound like an attack on Christianity. Climate change, healthcare, gender equality, public education, everything gets twisted into a threat against Christian values. And once people believe that defending their religion means rejecting anything new, progress itself becomes the enemy. This cycle doesn't just misinform people, it isolates them. It traps them in a worldview where they can't trust teachers, scientists, journalists, or even family members who see things differently. And that's not faith. That's fear. It's important to realize that Fox News isn't defending Christianity, it's exploiting it. They know exactly how to play on religious pride, cultural nostalgia, and moral panic. They turn faith into fuel for outrage, and outrage into profit. They'll never tell viewers that religion has a complex, often troubling history with race and power, because acknowledging that would threaten the illusion that Christianity has always been pure and persecuted. They'll never mention that many Christian institutions openly supported colonialism, slavery, and segregation, or that some still resist equality today, because that doesn't sell. What sells is the feeling that you're the righteous one, that you're standing against evil, that you are the last defender of truth and godliness in a corrupt world. That emotional loop is powerful, it's addictive, and the more you feed it, the less reality matters. This is why fact-checking doesn't work on outrage. It's not about information anymore, it's about identity. People don't defend the lie because they believe it's true, they defend it because it defines who they are. And that's how a single misleading headline about a school textbook can become another front in the so-called war on Christianity. But here's the irony. The more Fox News insists that Christianity is under attack, the more it pushes the faith into exactly what it claims to oppose: a defensive, angry, insular movement defined by fear instead of compassion. When you strip away the politics and look at what's left, you see that the real threat isn't people criticizing Christianity. It's the people twisting it into a weapon. If Christianity is strong, it doesn't need protection from a school book. It doesn't need billionaires shouting its defense from TV studios. And it definitely doesn't need to be shielded from history. What it needs, what any belief system needs, is honesty, the courage to look at its own flaws and learn from them. But honesty doesn't generate ratings, anger does, and that's the great irony of it all. A network that claims to defend faith has turned it into a business. Every headline, every crisis, every fear about textbooks and teachers, it's all part of the same formula. Keep the audience scared enough to stop thinking, angry enough to stay loyal, and certain enough to never question the source of their outrage, because questioning that would mean questioning the people who built their worldview. And that's something Fox News will never allow. They'll keep selling the same stories about evil liberals, anti-Christian textbooks, and schools brainwashing kids because it keeps the machine running, and the machine runs on fear. The tragedy is that so many decent, well-meaning people get caught inside it, people who just wanted to defend their faith but ended up defending lies instead. And as long as outrage feels righteous, the truth doesn't stand a chance. When people live inside a constant feedback loop of outrage, their sense of reality begins to change. They start to see attacks everywhere, in books, in classrooms, in conversations that never even mention them. That's what Fox News has achieved with its brand of religious sensationalism. It's not about persuading people with arguments. It's about changing what they feel before they ever think. The goal isn't understanding, it's reaction. If viewers feel angry, betrayed, and scared, they'll watch longer. They'll click more headlines. They'll trust Fox more deeply, because Fox feels like the only one telling them the truth. But the truth they're being fed is emotional fiction. It's a story designed to divide, one that paints Christians as eternal victims, liberals as villains, and truth as whatever keeps the audience enraged. It's a strange kind of religion in itself. Instead of sermons, there are primetime hosts. Instead of scripture, there are talking points. And instead of spiritual salvation, there's the satisfaction of outrage, a constant reaffirmation that you're right, they're wrong, and the world is out to get you. That's why stories like the Christianity equals white supremacy textbook headline are so effective. They're symbols of persecution, modern myths built to sustain an identity crisis. The narrative goes something like this. The world used to honor faith, but now it mocks it. Once Christians built the country, now they're being erased. Once schools taught the Bible, now they teach blasphemy. This myth keeps people nostalgic for a past that never really existed. A past where morality was simple, where everyone believed the same way, where the church was always right. But that past is an illusion, carefully preserved and marketed to people who fear the complexity of change. And when people cling to illusions, they become easier to steer. They'll defend the lie even harder than the truth, because the lie feels like home. The irony is that if Fox News actually cared about truth, it could easily explore the real history of Christianity's connection to power and race, a history filled with contradictions, reformers, and people who dared to question authority from within their own faith. But those stories don't generate the same heat. They don't divide. They don't sell ads. So instead we get endless loops of panic. The textbook outrage, the holiday outrage, the gender outrage, the Christian values under attack outrage. It's not journalism, it's performance. And what makes it even more dangerous is that many people watching don't realize it's a performance. They see real anchors, professional lighting, serious graphics. It looks like news, but it's theater, scripted to look factual, engineered to feel moral. And once someone emotionally commits to that theater, every contradiction can be explained away. When the story changes, it's new information. When the facts are disproven, it's the media covering their tracks. When you question the narrative, you're attacking faith. The structure of belief protects itself. It's not just about theology anymore. It's about identity, belonging, community, things people will fight for long after the facts stop mattering. So when a textbook points out that extremist groups have co-opted Christian symbols, that's not an attack, it's reality. But to someone conditioned by Fox to see every critique as persecution, reality itself feels like blasphemy. That's how you know propaganda is working, when truth feels offensive. What's even more interesting is that Fox's entire strategy mirrors the very thing it claims to fight against. They accuse the left of indoctrinating kids through education, while they themselves indoctrinate adults through fear. They call secularism brainwashing, while pushing nightly doses of emotional manipulation disguised as morality. And because it's tied to religion, it's almost immune to skepticism. Once you connect lies to divine purpose, questioning them becomes sin. That's the genius of the strategy, and the tragedy for everyone caught inside it. The people most outraged by that textbook story don't realize they're defending an illusion. They think they're standing up for faith, but they're really standing up for a corporate machine that profits from division. Religion gives the illusion moral weight. It's not just us versus them, it's good versus evil. And that turns every political issue, every piece of media, every classroom discussion into a holy war. That's why Fox doesn't want to talk about nuance. Nuance doesn't create enemies, but fear does. And fear has become the glue that holds the modern religious right together. Look closely, and you'll see how Fox merges religion with nationalism, how it treats the Bible and the flag as interchangeable symbols, how God and country are used in the same sentences to blur the line between belief and obedience. That's not patriotism, that's emotional conditioning. Once people accept that true Americans must be Christian, and that true Christians must follow conservative politics, questioning either becomes impossible. It's the perfect trap. It turns faith into ideology. An ideology doesn't care about truth. It only cares about loyalty. That's why these outrage stories never go away. They don't need to be true. They just need to feel true. Because when something feels true, it reinforces belonging, and belonging is stronger than evidence. So every time Fox airs another attack on Christianity story, it's not just selling outrage, it's reaffirming identity. It's whispering to its audience, you are the righteous ones. The world doesn't understand you. They're trying to take your faith, your freedom, your voice. Stay with us. Trust us. We're the only ones on your side. It's emotional manipulation disguised as fellowship, and it works because it plays on the deepest human instincts: fear of rejection, fear of uncertainty, fear of meaninglessness. Those are the same instincts religion has used for centuries to control believers. The difference now is that a media company has figured out how to monetize it 24 hours a day. It's worth pausing to consider what kind of world this creates. When every disagreement becomes an attack on faith, dialogue dies. When facts become insults, education collapses. When morality becomes entertainment, truth has no defenders. And that's the real cost of Fox's religious manipulation. Not just misinformation, but the erosion of empathy. Because when people believe they're defending God's truth, they stop listening, they stop questioning, they stop caring about what's actually true. They just fight, and Fox keeps handing them enemies to fight against: teachers, activists, scientists, journalists, anyone who threatens the illusion that Christianity and America are the same thing. But that illusion is dangerous. It blinds people to reality. It replaces understanding with slogans, compassion with suspicion. It turns belief into armor. And once belief becomes armor, It no longer protects truth, it protects power. That's what we're seeing now. A religion repackaged as a political weapon, wielded by corporations that preach morality but profit from deception. Fox News doesn't want its viewers to know that Christianity has been used to justify oppression. It wants them to believe that acknowledging history is the same as hating God. But that's not enlightenment, that's manipulation. If you can convince people that truth is persecution, you can control them forever. And that's exactly what's happening. The tragedy is that so many people who fall for it are not bad people. They're often kind, honest and sincere, but they've been conditioned to see the world through a false moral war. They think they're defending faith when they're really defending fear. They've been told that doubt is dangerous, when in fact doubt is the beginning of wisdom. But doubt doesn't keep people watching. Certainty does. Outrage does. And so the cycle continues. Nightly sermons about moral decay, endless panels warning of the attack on Christianity, and headlines crafted to keep fear alive, all while the world outside moves on, trying to have the conversations Fox refuses to allow. Conversations about history, race, science, equality, and yes, the role of religion in all of it. Those conversations aren't attacks. They're necessary. They're how societies grow. They're how understanding deepens. But as long as Fox and others keep framing curiosity as hostility, growth will always look like betrayal. And maybe that's the most revealing part of all, that a network claiming to defend faith has built its empire on keeping people afraid of learning. Because learning, after all, is the one thing that can break the spell. Breaking that spell isn't easy, because what Fox News sells isn't just information, it's identity. When someone has built their entire worldview around a constant stream of us versus them, asking them to question it feels like asking them to question who they are. That's not just an intellectual challenge, it's an emotional one. And Fox knows this. Their producers, hosts, and executives have studied it for years. They understand that when people feel uncertain, when the world seems confusing, the easiest way to make them loyal is to give them a simple story, one that turns complexity into conflict, nuance into danger, and disagreement into sin. In this story, the world is full of enemies trying to destroy Christian America. The elites, the educators, the immigrants, the scientists, the activists. The heroes are the faithful, the patriotic, the silent majority who see through the lies. And Fox presents itself as their voice, their defender, their prophet of truth. But prophets are supposed to tell people the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Fox does the opposite. It comforts people with falsehoods and calls it truth. That's why the network is so powerful. It tells people exactly what they want to hear, that they're righteous, that they're under attack, and that everyone who disagrees is part of a godless conspiracy. And once that story is accepted, every lie becomes believable, because the point of propaganda isn't to make people believe everything, it's to make them believe anything that fits the narrative. So when Fox twisted the textbook story into an anti-Christian attack, it didn't have to make sense. It just had to feel right. It just had to reinforce the identity that viewers already carried. That's what makes this form of manipulation so effective. It doesn't fight against belief, it merges with it. It doesn't tell people to stop thinking, it tells them they're thinking correctly already. It flatters their ignorance and calls it faith. And that's the tragedy. Because while people sit in front of their TVs, furious about Christian persecution, the real damage happens quietly. Critical thinking weakens, compassion erodes, and whole communities become detached from reality. Fox has turned faith into an echo chamber. And in that echo chamber, truth isn't measured by evidence, it's measured by how loudly you agree. But the thing about echo chambers is that they always collapse. The truth has a way of finding cracks, and once those cracks open, the entire structure begins to shake. Sometimes it starts small, a viewer noticing that one of the network's stories doesn't match what they see in their own life, or a young person in the family asking questions that the TV doesn't answer, or someone realizing that outrage isn't making them happier. It's just making them tired. That's how the spell starts to break, not with a single revelation, but with quiet exhaustion. Because constant anger is exhausting, constant fear is exhausting, and deep down, most people don't want to live that way. They just want meaning, they just want connection, they just want to feel like the world still makes sense. That's what religion once promised. That's what Fox now pretends to offer. But neither can deliver it if truth is off the table. It's strange how similar the tactics are. Preachers warning about the godless world, and anchors warning about the anti-Christian left. Both rely on the same formula: create fear, offer salvation, and demand loyalty. Both depend on an audience that's too afraid to question what's being sold. But truth doesn't need fear to survive. It only needs curiosity. And curiosity is exactly what Fox trains people to reject. The moment someone asks, "Wait, what if that's not true?" The illusion crumbles, the fear loses power, and once fear is gone, control goes with it. That's why the network treats doubt as betrayal. It's the same psychological mechanism that religious institutions have used for centuries to keep people obedient, not because they loved truth, but because they feared losing authority. And authority is what this is all about. Fox isn't defending Christianity, it's defending control. Control over what people believe, how they vote, how they see themselves, and who they blame when the world changes. It's not a defense of faith, it's the commodification of faith, turning belief into a product and outrage into currency. And every time a viewer shouts at their TV in anger over some attack on religion, Fox wins. Not because it's true, but because the emotion keeps the machine alive. The irony is that the very thing Fox claims to protect, moral integrity, is the first thing it destroys. There's no morality in deceit, there's no virtue in fear-mongering, and there's no faith in a system that needs lies to survive. So when a textbook mentions the historical connection between Christianity and white supremacy, that's not hate speech. It's accountability. It's history. Uncomfortable, yes, but necessary if we ever want to understand how belief can be twisted into power. And yet Fox would rather people stay ignorant, because ignorance is profitable. Ignorance makes the world simple, and simple stories keep viewers hooked. The problem is that reality isn't simple. The history of Christianity is not one of constant persecution. It's a story of power, empires, crusades, colonization, segregation, and at times reform. It's full of contradictions, and facing those contradictions doesn't destroy faith. It deepens understanding. But Fox doesn't want understanding. It wants loyalty. It wants people who can be told that acknowledging history equals hating God. It wants people who see knowledge as blasphemy. It wants an audience that's easier to enrage than to enlighten. And sadly, it's getting exactly that. The more Fox turns religion into a political weapon, the more it empties that religion of any moral depth. What remains isn't spirituality. It's tribalism with a cross on it. It's a belief system where compassion is weakness, empathy is betrayal, and truth is whatever helps your side win. That's not Christianity. That's manipulation wearing a halo. And the worst part, many people don't even see it happening, because when propaganda is wrapped in prayer, it looks holy. It's no coincidence that Fox constantly uses moral language, values, tradition, faith, freedom. These words sound virtuous, but on that network, they don't describe ideas. They describe weapons. Weapons to divide, weapons to distract, weapons to make people fight over culture, while ignoring the corruption, greed, and deceit happening behind the curtain. Every minute that people argue about anti-Christian textbooks, they're not asking who benefits from their anger. And that's the point. Because as long as the outrage keeps flowing, the money keeps flowing. It's not about God. It's about ratings. It's about keeping millions of people emotionally hooked on a false sense of persecution. One that turns every classroom, every headline, every social issue into another holy war. But here's the truth Fox doesn't want to admit. The world isn't waging war on Christianity. It's just asking questions that religion can't answer. That's what scares them. Not atheists, not textbooks, not progressives. Just questions. Questions that demand honesty instead of dogma, compassion instead of fear, reason instead of rage. Because questions are the one thing no ideology can fully control. The moment people start thinking for themselves, the spell breaks. And maybe that's the quiet revolution happening beneath all the noise. More people starting to see through the outrage, starting to realize that being under attack isn't the same as being accountable. Maybe they're starting to notice that the loudest defenders of faith are often the ones profiting most from its corruption. And maybe, just maybe, they're beginning to understand that truth doesn't need defending. It only needs discovering. So when you hear stories about a textbook attacking Christianity, ask yourself, who benefits from your outrage? Who gains when you stop questioning? Who gets richer when you stay afraid? Because the answer isn't God. It's the people who built an empire out of your anger. And the only way to stop them is to stop letting them tell you what to fear. The real solution isn't outrage, it's awareness. It's the willingness to step back and see how easily emotion can be turned into a weapon. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how every segment follows the same rhythm. Outrage, reassurance, outrage again. A problem is created, then exaggerated, then repeated until it feels like a crisis. And before you can even breathe, there's another attack to defend against. It never stops. It's not meant to. The goal isn't to resolve anything. It's to keep the anger alive. Anger is what binds the audience together. It's what fills the comment sections, drives the donations, keeps people glued to their screens. And as long as they're angry, they won't ask deeper questions. Questions like, why is a multi-billion-dollar network pretending to be the voice of the oppressed? Why does a company owned by billionaires insist that ordinary Christians are under siege? The answer is simple. because fear sells better than understanding, and moral panic is more profitable than progress. That's why Fox keeps returning to these stories about Christianity being under attack. It's emotional clickbait dressed as holy duty. It tells people that learning history is dangerous, that critical thinking is evil, that curiosity is sin. Because once you convince people that knowledge itself is the enemy, they'll never leave your grip. And here's the deeper tragedy. By framing Christianity as constantly victimized, Fox is actually cheapening the very faith it claims to protect. It turns a spiritual tradition that once talked about love, humility, and justice into a marketing slogan for fear and division. It takes something personal and profound, a belief system people build their identities around, and turns it into ammunition. It hollows it out until all that's left is the shell of Christianity, without any of its moral substance. When you strip away compassion and replace it with outrage, what remains isn't faith, it's fanaticism. You can see it everywhere now, in online comment threads, in political rallies, even in churches. People shouting about defending God while ignoring the parts of their own scripture that call for empathy, self-reflection, and peace. That's what happens when belief is shaped by media instead of meaning. The anger starts to feel holy, the hate starts to feel righteous, and soon the same people who once spoke about love thy neighbor are cheering when someone they disagree with suffers. Fox has built an empire on that transformation, taking the emotional energy that religion once used for unity and turning it into fuel for division. It's not a coincidence that the same network that warns about moral decay profits from amplifying it. Their entire strategy depends on moral panic. They need people convinced that society is falling apart, that faith is dying, that their way of life is collapsing. Because panic keeps people from noticing who's really benefiting from all the chaos. Meanwhile, the rest of the world keeps moving forward, asking questions, confronting history, learning how belief and power have shaped our societies, both for good and for harm. That's not hatred toward religion, it's growth. But to those trapped inside Fox's outrage machine, growth looks like betrayal. The idea that religion might have flaws, that history might be messy, that morality might not come from dogma, those are dangerous thoughts in a world built on certainty. And that's why Fox fights them. Not because the truth threatens faith, but because it threatens control. If people start seeing nuance, they'll stop seeing enemies. If they stop seeing enemies, they'll stop feeling persecuted. And if they stop feeling persecuted, they'll stop needing Fox News. That's the quiet truth beneath all the noise. Fox doesn't need Christianity to survive. It needs Christians to feel attacked. So it will keep inventing enemies, textbooks, professors, scientists, even fellow Christians who don't fit the narrative. It will keep feeding fear until there's nothing left to fear except reality itself. But there's a way out, and it starts with recognizing the pattern, seeing how emotion is being manipulated, questioning the stories that feel too perfectly enraging, asking yourself whether what you're being told is actually true or just emotionally satisfying. Because once you start questioning, the power of propaganda begins to crumble. The truth doesn't scream, it doesn't flash across a ticker or demand your loyalty. It just waits to be noticed. And when you finally see it, the noise starts to fade, the anger starts to feel hollow. The war on Christianity starts to look less like persecution and more like marketing. It becomes clear that nobody is trying to erase faith. People are just trying to understand it, to place it in context, to examine how it's been used and misused, to separate the parts that heal from the parts that harm. That process isn't an attack, it's a step toward honesty. And if a belief system can't survive honesty, then maybe it was never as strong as people thought. So when Fox tells you that truth is the enemy, remember, the people telling you that are the ones most afraid of it. The network that warns about moral decline profits from moral confusion. The one that claims to defend truth depends on keeping you from seeing it. And every time they say they're coming for your faith, what they really mean is, don't look too closely at us. Because if you ever did, if you ever saw how deeply the lies run, how deliberately your fears are being fed, how expertly your outrage is being crafted, you'd never believe them again. You'd realize that the war they keep describing doesn't exist. It's not a war against Christianity. It's a war against awareness. And it's time more people stopped fighting for fear and started standing for truth. Because truth doesn't need permission. It doesn't need protection. It just needs people brave enough to face it. When you control what people fear, you control what they believe. Maybe it's time to take that control back.